In the cold depths of space, where empires rise and fall on the backs of enslaved worlds, the Kethvar Syndicate had perfected the art of acquisition. For 3 centuries, their bioscanners had identified the weakest specimens from primitive worlds, creatures suitable only for manual labor, genetic experiments, or gladiatorial entertainment. Their latest catch from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star seemed no different. A lone human, isolated and vulnerable. But the Kethvar had made a critical error in their assessment algorithms. They had scanned for biological weaknesses, not psychological warfare capabilities. They had measured bone density and muscle mass, not kill ratios and tactical expertise. They had identified a human, but they had no concept of what it meant when that human's own species whispered his call sign in reverent fear. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth's most dangerous predator wasn't born with claws or fangs, but with a mind that could turn any environment into a hunting ground, and why some humans earn names that even their enemies dare not speak aloud. They had captured Marcus Reaper Kane, and their 300-year reign of terror was about to meet its end. The Kethvar slaver ship Drakmor hung in the shadow of Earth's moon, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Its captain, Zethlock, studied the scanning reports with growing satisfaction. The target was isolated, far from any population centers, displaying the typical weakness patterns they had observed in thousands of primitive species across the galaxy. Single biological entity detected, his scanner operator reported, mandibles clicking with excitement. Location, remote mountainous terrain, no significant technology signatures in immediate vicinity. Physiological readings indicate standard bipedal configuration, approximately 1.8 meters in height, 80 kilograms mass. Zethlock's 4 eyes gleamed with predatory hunger. Humans had recently appeared on the Syndicate's acquisition lists after their planet's first crewed ventures into space had revealed their existence. Early reports suggested they possessed adequate intelligence for complex manual labor and showed promising aggression responses under stress, perfect for the fighting pits of Mordak Prime. Any defensive capabilities? Zethlock inquired, though he asked more out of protocol than genuine concern. In 3 centuries of raids across 47 star systems, the Kethvar had never encountered a pre-spaceflight species capable of meaningful resistance. Minimal, Captain. Subject appears to be carrying primitive kinetic weapons and basic survival equipment. Standard extraction protocols should be more than sufficient. Marcus Kane had been tracking the elk through the Montana wilderness for 6 hours when the sky began to burn. He dropped into a crouch behind a fallen log, his weathered hands instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his back. 23 years of military service had taught him to recognize threats that didn't belong in nature's symphony, and the high-pitched whine descending from the cloud-covered peaks definitely qualified. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a pulsing blue glow that filtered through the forest canopy like alien starlight. Marcus's pale blue eyes, scarred by shrapnel from the Kandahar bombing that had ended his active duty, scanned the tree-line with mechanical precision. His breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that had kept him alive through 14 deployments across 3 continents. At 52 years old, Marcus Kane had thought his war days were behind him. The retirement cabin in the Montana Rockies was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where the only battles he fought were against nature's elements and his own haunted memories. The mountains didn't care about his call sign or the classified operations that had earned him a reputation as the military's most effective problem solver. Here, he was just another aging veteran trying to find peace in isolation. The ship that descended through the cloud cover shattered that illusion completely. Marcus had seen enough advanced aircraft during his military career to recognize technology that surpassed anything in Earth's arsenals. The vessel was roughly triangular, its surface rippling with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. It moved with impossible silence until it reached the clearing where Marcus had been planning to make camp, then descended with the controlled grace of something that had never known the limitations of conventional physics. As the ship settled onto the forest floor, Marcus felt the familiar calm that had earned him his reputation among Special Forces units worldwide. His breathing remained steady, his heartbeat controlled. The same icy focus that had guided him through hostage rescues in Mogadishu and counterterrorism operations in the Hindu Kush settled over his thoughts like a comfortable shroud. The ship's hull split open with a sound like tearing metal, revealing an interior that glowed with bioluminescent panels. The creatures that emerged stood 7 feet tall, with elongated skulls that housed 4 multifaceted eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. Their skin had the texture of leather mixed with chitinous plates, and they moved with the fluid coordination of natural predators. Marcus counted 6 individuals, each carrying weapons that resembled organic growths more than manufactured tools. Their movements suggested military training, but their formation showed they expected no resistance from their target. They spread out in a loose circle, energy weapons sweeping the clearing with casual arrogance. The largest of the aliens spoke in a language that sounded like grinding stone mixed with insect chittering. A smaller device on its chest translated the words into accented English. "Primitive human, you will surrender yourself for transport to processing facilities. Resistance will result in unnecessary pain." Marcus remained motionless behind his log, calculating angles and distances with the precision that had made him legendary among his former peers. 6 targets, unknown weapons capabilities, unfamiliar physiology. The tactical situation was challenging, but not impossible. He had faced worse odds in Damascus when his unit had been surrounded by enemy forces, and he had been the only one to walk out of the embassy compound. "You have 10 seconds to reveal yourself," the alien announced. "After that period, we will employ localized detection methods." Marcus made his decision. The rifle in his hands was a custom-modified M24, chambered for .300 Winchester Magnum rounds that he had loaded personally. It had been his companion through the final years of his military service, when his official duties had required precision and discretion rather than overwhelming firepower. The scope was aligned perfectly, and the range to the nearest target was less than 200 meters, close enough to guarantee accuracy, even in the fading mountain light. The first shot took the lead alien in the center of what Marcus assumed was its torso. The high-velocity round punched through its armor, plating with a wet crack, sending the creature spinning backward into the ship's hull. The remaining aliens scattered immediately, seeking cover behind trees and rocks while their weapons began to glow with increasing intensity. Marcus had already shifted position before the first alien hit the ground. Military doctrine had taught him that staying mobile was the key to survival against superior numbers, and the dense forest provided excellent concealment for someone who knew how to use terrain to his advantage. The aliens' weapons discharged with sounds like controlled lightning, sending bolts of energy that turned trees into smoking craters and melted rocks into glowing slag. Their fire was accurate but unfocused, suggesting they were accustomed to overwhelming their targets through superior technology rather than tactical precision. Marcus's second shot caught another alien as it attempted to flank his original position. The bullet struck the creature's elongated skull just above its cluster of eyes, dropping it instantly. The remaining 4 aliens began communicating in rapid bursts of their chittering language, and Marcus could hear the frustration in their voices even without translation. He moved again, using the hunting skills that had served him well in both military operations and civilian life to circle around the aliens' improvised perimeter. The forest floor was carpeted with years of fallen leaves that muffled his footsteps, and the deep shadows created by the dense canopy provided natural camouflage for someone wearing earth-toned clothing. The third alien died as it attempted to coordinate its companion's search patterns. Marcus's shot took it through the side of its skull, the bullet's impact spinning the creature around before it collapsed into a pile of fallen branches. The weapon it had been carrying discharged randomly as it fell, sending energy bolts into the sky that lit up the forest like strobe lights. The remaining 3 aliens abandoned their search pattern and converged on Marcus's last known position, their weapons blazing continuously as they advanced. Trees exploded into splinters around them, and the air filled with the acrid smell of superheated wood and scorched earth. Marcus waited until they had committed fully to their advance before emerging from concealment 40 meters to their left. His 4th and 5th shots came in rapid succession, each bullet finding its target with the precision that had made him a legend among military snipers. The aliens dropped within seconds of each other, their weapons falling silent as their bodies hit the forest floor. The final alien had learned from its companion's mistakes. Instead of charging Marcus's position, it retreated toward the ship while laying down suppressive fire that kept Marcus pinned behind a cluster of granite boulders. The creature's weapons seemed to have unlimited ammunition, and its energy bolts were gradually destroying the rocks that provided Marcus's only cover. Marcus knew he had one opportunity before his position became untenable. He waited for a brief pause in the alien's fire pattern, then rolled out from behind the boulders with his rifle already aimed. The alien was running backward toward its ship, firing over its shoulder with remarkable accuracy for a creature in full retreat. The final shot was the most difficult of the engagement. Marcus had to compensate for both his own movement and his target's erratic retreat, calculating angles and trajectories while energy bolts passed within inches of his body. The bullet struck the alien center mass just as it reached the ship's entrance, sending the creature tumbling backward into the vessel's glowing interior. Marcus approached the ship cautiously, his rifle trained on the entrance while he scanned for additional threats. The interior was empty except for the dead alien, but the vessel itself was clearly still active. Panels along the walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. He had just begun to examine the ship's controls when new sounds echoed from the forest behind him. Marcus turned to see lights descending from the sky. More ships, moving with the same impossible grace as the first vessel. The engagement that had just ended was apparently only the beginning of a much larger operation. The lead ship settled into the clearing with mechanical precision, and this time the crew that emerged moved with significantly more caution. These aliens were different from the first group. Larger, more heavily armored, and carrying weapons that glowed with barely contained energy. Their leader surveyed the carnage that Marcus had created, then spoke in the same chittering language that was translated by its chest device. "Impressive resistance for a primitive species," it announced. "However, you have merely delayed the inevitable conclusion." Marcus counted 12 new opponents, too many to engage effectively with his remaining ammunition. The tactical situation had shifted beyond his ability to control through conventional means. But as he watched the aliens spread out in a professional search pattern, he felt the familiar calm that had carried him through impossible situations in the past. They wanted to capture him alive. That much was obvious from their cautious approach and non-lethal weapon settings, which meant they considered him valuable enough to take intact, despite the losses he had already inflicted on their forces. Marcus Kane had spent 23 years learning how to turn disadvantages into opportunities. As the aliens closed in on his position, he began planning how to make their victory as costly as possible. The war was far from over. Marcus regained consciousness in what could only be described as a living nightmare designed by committee. The holding cell around him pulsed with the same organic energy patterns he had observed in the alien ship, but magnified to an overwhelming degree. Walls that looked like crystallized bone stretched upward into darkness, while bioluminescent veins running through the floor provided the only source of light. The air tasted of copper and ozone, with an underlying chemical tang that made his eyes water. His body ached in places that suggested he had been subjected to some form of advanced medical scanning, and the absence of his rifle and tactical gear confirmed that his captors were thorough, if nothing else. Through the translucent wall of his cell, Marcus could observe a corridor that stretched beyond visual range in both directions. Other cells lined the opposite wall, each containing creatures that represented species he had never imagined. Some appeared humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways that triggered instinctive revulsion. Others defied description entirely, their forms seeming to shift when he tried to focus on specific details. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention to the left end of the corridor. 3 aliens moved toward his cell with the confident stride of beings accustomed to total authority over their domain. The lead figure was larger than the soldiers who had captured him, its 4 eyes glowing with an inner light that suggested enhanced intelligence or artificial augmentation. "The human has recovered consciousness," it announced through the translation device mounted on its chest. "Begin preliminary evaluation protocols." A section of the cell wall dissolved like mist, creating an opening just large enough for Marcus to exit. 2 heavily armed guards flanked the entrance, their weapons trained on a center mass with professional precision. The message was clear: cooperation would be rewarded with continued existence, while resistance would result in immediate termination. Marcus stepped through the opening with the same controlled movement that had served him well during military operations. His captors expected submission and fear from their prisoners, but 23 years of facing death had taught him that maintaining composure under pressure was often the difference between victory and defeat. The corridor beyond his cell was a study in alien architecture that seemed designed to intimidate and disorient. The ceiling arched impossibly high overhead, supported by structures that resembled the ribcage of some massive creature. Bioluminescent patterns flowing through the walls created shadows that shifted constantly, making depth perception difficult and navigation nearly impossible for newcomers. They passed dozens of cells containing beings from across the galaxy, each prisoner representing a species that had fallen victim to the HFY Syndicate's expansion policies. Marcus observed their conditions with the analytical mind of someone accustomed to gathering intelligence in hostile environments. The aliens were well-fed and apparently healthy, suggesting that their captors had reasons for keeping them in good condition. The evaluation chamber they entered could have been designed specifically to break human psychological resistance. The space was vast enough to make him feel insignificant, while the walls displayed holographic images of worlds being consumed by massive industrial operations. Beings that might once have been sentient creatures operated machinery with mechanical precision, their movements suggesting that whatever intelligence they had once possessed had been surgically removed. "You are designated as Specimen 47,381, the lead alien announced, settling its bulk onto a throne-like structure that grew from the floor as it approached. "Your species designation is human, originating from the 3rd planet of stellar system designated Sol 3. You will be processed for sale to appropriate buyers within the next planetary rotation." Marcus remained silent, his pale blue eyes fixed on the alien with the unwavering stare that had unnerved enemy interrogators during his military career. He had endured questioning by experts trained specifically to break American Special Forces personnel, and this creature's attempts at intimidation were amateurish by comparison. "Your lack of response indicates defiance," the alien continued. "This trait can be corrected through appropriate biochemical adjustment procedures. However, buyers often prefer specimens that retain some level of independent initiative, as such traits improve performance in manual labor applications." The alien gestured toward one of the wall displays, which shifted to show a massive industrial complex where thousands of beings toiled under the supervision of mechanical overseers. The scale of the operation was staggering. Entire continents covered with factories and mining operations that stripped worlds bare of natural resources. "The HFY Syndicate has operated for 300 standard years," the creature explained with obvious pride. "We have acquired specimens from 47 star systems, establishing the most efficient resource extraction network in this galactic sector. Your species will contribute to this success through physical labor and genetic material harvest." Marcus spoke for the first time since his capture, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect among military units worldwide. You've made a mistake. The alien's four eyes focused on him with renewed interest. Explain this statement. You scan for biological weaknesses, not combat capabilities, Marcus continued. You measure bone density and muscle mass, not kill ratios and tactical expertise. You identified a human, but you have no understanding of what that designation actually means. The creature's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. Your species has not achieved interstellar flight capabilities. Your technology is primitive by galactic standards. Your physical attributes are unremarkable compared to other mammalian species we have encountered. These facts suggest that your confidence is based on psychological delusion rather than objective reality. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile that had never failed to unsettle his enemies during interrogations. My name is Marcus Kane. My military designation was Staff Sergeant, United States Army Special Forces. My operational call sign was Reaper. The alien showed no recognition of these terms, but Marcus could see that his calm demeanor was beginning to have an effect. Prisoners were supposed to show fear, desperation, or anger when faced with their fate. The complete absence of any emotional response suggested that either this human was psychologically damaged or possessed capabilities that their evaluation protocols had failed to detect. You will be transported to Holding Facility Delta 7 for further processing, the alien announced, apparently deciding that additional interrogation was unnecessary. Guards will escort you to the transport chamber immediately. As they led him deeper into the ship's interior, Marcus began gathering intelligence with a systematic approach that had made him invaluable to military planners. The HFY vessel was massive, larger than any human-built structure he had ever encountered. Corridors branched off in all directions, suggesting a crew complement in the thousands. Security protocols appeared sophisticated, but relied heavily on technological superiority rather than tactical awareness. More importantly, the aliens' behavior suggested they had never encountered organized resistance from their captives. Their guard positions were sloppy, their weapons discipline was lacking, and their command structure showed signs of overconfidence that Marcus had learned to exploit during counterinsurgency operations. The transport chamber was another study in alien engineering designed to overwhelm human sensory perception. Dozens of smaller craft lined the walls, each capable of carrying perhaps 20 prisoners. The vessels shared the same organic appearance as the main ship, their hulls pulsing with energy patterns that suggested they were grown rather than manufactured. Marcus was loaded into a transport alongside 11 other recently captured beings. The diversity of species represented was staggering, ranging from creatures that looked almost human to others that challenged his ability to process what he was observing. Most appeared resigned to their fate, their body language suggesting that hope had been systematically removed through previous experiences with HFY efficiency. The journey to the holding facility took several hours, during which Marcus continued his intelligence-gathering efforts. The transport's pilot was a different species from the HFY, smaller, more nervous, with the demeanor of someone performing essential but unpleasant duties. Its weapon was secured in a holster that suggested it was rarely needed, and its attention was focused entirely on navigation rather than prisoner security. Through the transport's transparent sections, Marcus observed a space station that defied human engineering concepts. The structure was vast enough to house millions of beings, its surface covered with docking bays that accommodated vessels from dozens of different civilizations. Ships arrived and departed in a constant stream, their cargo holds filled with prisoners destined for sale to buyers throughout the galaxy. The holding facility itself was organized with industrial efficiency that reminded Marcus of the concentration camps he had studied during military history courses. Prisoners were sorted by species and physical capabilities, then housed in sections designed to maximize processing throughput while minimizing operational costs. The scale of the operation suggested that the HFY syndicate had been perfecting their methods for centuries. Marcus was assigned to a dormitory containing approximately 50 other humans, all captured during recent raids on Earth's outlying settlements, and remote locations. Their stories were remarkably similar. Isolated individuals taken during moments when they were separated from any potential rescue forces. The Kethvar had clearly studied human settlement patterns and identified the most vulnerable targets for acquisition. His cellmates ranged from farmers and hikers to researchers and explorers, all sharing the bewildered terror of beings thrust into a situation beyond their comprehension. Most had already begun showing signs of psychological breakdown. Their conversations focused on acceptance of their fate and speculation about which buyers might offer the least horrific working conditions. Marcus listened to their discussions with growing anger that he kept carefully hidden behind the stoic expression that had become second nature during his military career. These aliens had built an empire on the systematic enslavement of beings who lacked the knowledge or capabilities to resist their predations. They had grown comfortable with their technological advantages and organizational superiority, creating a system that functioned through intimidation and despair. But Marcus Kane had spent 23 years learning how to destroy systems that depended on psychological dominance. He had infiltrated terrorist networks, disrupted enemy supply lines, and eliminated targets that had been considered untouchable by conventional military forces. The Kethvar Syndicate had unknowingly captured someone trained specifically to identify and exploit the weaknesses in seemingly impregnable organizations. As his fellow prisoners settled into sleep, driven by exhaustion and hopelessness, Marcus began planning their escape. The operation would require patience, careful observation, and the systematic elimination of security measures that the aliens considered foolproof. Most importantly, it would require demonstrating to his species that humans were capable of fighting back against enemies who had never faced organized resistance. The Kethvar had captured Marcus Kane, thinking they had acquired another helpless primitive. They were about to learn why his own people had given him a call sign that spoke of death itself. Marcus spent the first week in captivity, learning everything he could about the Kethvar operation. He moved through the holding facility with the quiet observation skills that had made him invaluable to military intelligence units, cataloging guard rotations, security protocols, and structural weaknesses that might be exploited during an escape attempt. The facility operated on a cycle that resembled Earth's 24-hour day, though the artificial lighting never changed intensity enough to create natural sleep patterns. Guards conducted head counts every 6 hours using handheld devices that apparently tracked some form of biological signature. The aliens responsible for prisoner management were a different species from the Kethvar themselves. Smaller beings with nervous dispositions that suggested they were more comfortable with administrative duties than direct confrontation. During meal distribution, Marcus observed that the facility's security relied heavily on automated systems rather than direct supervision. Prisoners moved through corridors under the watch of mechanical sentries that tracked movement but showed limited capability for tactical assessment. The Real security was psychological rather than physical. The aliens had created an environment designed to convince their captives that resistance was impossible. Marcus began his recruitment efforts with Sarah Chun, a geologist who had been captured during a research expedition in the Antarctic. She possessed the analytical mind that he needed for planning while maintaining enough emotional stability to function under pressure. Her expertise in geological engineering would be essential for understanding the station's structural vulnerabilities. "You're talking about suicide," Sarah whispered during their first planning session, held in the corner of the dormitory where the background noise of 50 sleeping humans provided acoustic cover. "Even if we could get out of this section, where would we go? We're in space, on an alien space station that's bigger than most cities." Marcus kept his voice at the same barely audible level that had served him during covert operations. The Kethvar made the same mistake that every successful organization makes eventually. They became comfortable with their own superiority. Their security is designed to prevent panicked escape attempts, not organized resistance. He gestured subtly toward the corridor visible through the dormitory's transparent wall. "Look at their guard positions. They're watching for individuals trying to break away from the group. not coordinated action by multiple prisoners. Their surveillance equipment is designed to track biological signatures, not detect planning or preparation activities. Sarah followed his gaze, her scientist's mind beginning to analyze the patterns that Marcus had already identified. The mechanical sentries have limited mobility, she observed. They're mounted on tracks that follow predetermined routes. And the biological scanners will be confused by large groups moving together. Marcus nodded approvingly. Sarah's quick understanding confirmed that she possessed the intellectual flexibility needed for the operation he was planning. The real advantage we have is something they've never encountered before. Every species they've captured has been taken as individuals or small groups. They've never dealt with organized military resistance. Over the following days, Marcus carefully expanded his recruitment network to include prisoners with specific skill sets that would be essential for a complex operation. David Rodriguez was a mechanical engineer whose understanding of systems integration would be crucial for interfacing with alien technology. Janet Morrison was a former police officer whose experience with tactical planning complemented Marcus's military expertise. The most valuable addition to his team was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist who had been captured while studying extremophile organisms in the deep ocean. Her knowledge of alien physiology was limited, but her scientific training allowed her to make educated assessments about Kethvar biology and potential weaknesses that could be exploited during combat operations. Their respiratory system appears to be more efficient than ours, Elena explained during a planning session, disguised as a casual conversation about their captures. But that efficiency comes from specialized organs that might be vulnerable to certain chemical compounds. If we could find a way to introduce contaminants into their air supply, we might be able to create significant tactical advantages. Marcus absorbed this information with the same systematic approach he had used to memorize enemy order of battle reports during his military career. Every piece of intelligence was potentially valuable, and success would depend on combining multiple small advantages into a coordinated plan that exploited all of the aliens' vulnerabilities simultaneously. The breakthrough came during the second week of captivity, when Marcus observed a maintenance cycle that revealed critical information about the station's infrastructure. Alien technicians entered their section to perform routine equipment checks, and their casual attitude suggested they considered the prisoners no more dangerous than livestock. The maintenance team's equipment included portable access terminals that interfaced directly with the station's control systems. Marcus watched their procedures with intense focus, memorizing the sequence of commands used to override security protocols and access restricted areas of the facility. More importantly, he observed that the aliens performing maintenance duties were not the same species as either the Kethvar or the administrative personnel. These were clearly specialized technicians, and their body language suggested they were accustomed to working without supervision or security oversight. Tonight, Marcus informed his team during the evening meal distribution. The next maintenance cycle begins at 0200 local time, and they'll be working on the environmental systems 2 sections over from here. That gives us a 4-hour window before the next security check. Sarah's expression reflected the nervous excitement that Marcus had seen in military personnel before their first combat operation. What about the other prisoners? We can't just leave them here. Marcus had wrestled with this ethical dilemma throughout his planning process. Military doctrine emphasized mission success over individual casualties, but abandoning innocent people violated everything he believed about American values and personal responsibility. We take everyone who's willing to fight, he decided. Anyone who wants to stay behind can remain in the dormitory, but we're not leaving people here to face retaliation. The plan that Marcus had developed over 2 weeks of careful observation was complex enough to account for multiple contingencies while remaining simple enough to execute under combat conditions. Phase 1 involved overpowering the maintenance technicians and accessing their equipment. Phase 2 required taking control of critical station systems while creating enough confusion to prevent organized response. Phase 3 was the most dangerous, fighting their way to the docking bays where escape vessels waited. As the artificial night cycle began, and most of the prisoners settled into sleep, Marcus moved through the dormitory with quiet efficiency. He approached each individual who had shown signs of emotional stability and physical capability, explaining the plan in terms that emphasized both the opportunity for escape and the risks involved in remaining passive. The response was better than he had expected. 43 of the 50 humans agreed to participate in the escape attempt, while the remaining 7 chose to remain behind rather than face the dangers involved in active resistance. Marcus felt no judgment toward their decision. Not everyone was psychologically equipped for combat, and he had seen brave soldiers make similar choices under impossible circumstances. At precisely 0200 hours, Marcus led his team through a maintenance access that Sarah had identified during her geological survey of their section. The passage was narrow and poorly lit, designed for alien technicians rather than human physiology, but it provided access to the station's environmental control systems without triggering security sensors. The maintenance team consisted of 3 aliens working without guards or weapons, their attention focused entirely on their technical duties. Marcus approached them with the silent movement that had allowed him to infiltrate enemy positions during special operations, while David and Janet moved to flank their positions from alternate access points. The first alien died before it realized that anything was wrong. Marcus's improvised weapon, a piece of metal torn from the dormitory wall and sharpened against the floor, struck the creature at the base of its skull where Elena had predicted its nervous system would be most vulnerable. The alien collapsed without making a sound, its complex tool array clattering to the floor. The second technician managed to emit a brief warning sound before David's attack struck home. The engineer had fashioned his own weapon from materials salvaged from the dormitory, and his strike was delivered with the precision of someone accustomed to working with mechanical systems. The alien's warning was cut off abruptly as it joined its companion on the floor. The third alien showed the quick reflexes that Marcus had expected from a species capable of interstellar travel. It activated what appeared to be an emergency beacon while backing toward an exit that would have led to the main corridor. Janet intercepted its retreat with the tactical awareness of a police officer trained to control dangerous situations. Her attack was professional and efficient, dropping the alien before its beacon could complete transmission. Marcus immediately moved to the alien's equipment array, studying the control interfaces with intense concentration. The technology was obviously advanced beyond anything in Earth's arsenals, but the basic principles appeared similar to human computer systems. Icons and command structures followed logical patterns that suggested they had been designed for maximum efficiency rather than security. Elena, I need you to examine these bodies, Marcus ordered while his fingers moved across the alien control panel. Find out everything you can about their physiology, especially anything that might help us identify weaknesses in their species. Sarah and David worked together to secure the area, while Janet maintained watch on the access points that could bring unwanted attention to their position. The next few minutes would determine whether their escape attempt succeeded or resulted in capture and execution for everyone involved. The maintenance terminal responded to Marcus's commands with surprising ease. The aliens had apparently never considered the possibility that prisoners might gain access to their systems, because security protocols were minimal and easily bypassed. Within minutes, Marcus had located the station schematics and identified both the location of the docking bays and the control systems that regulated artificial gravity and atmospheric pressure. Got it, he announced quietly. Docking Bay 7 has a transport that's fueled and ready for departure. The route takes us through 3 security checkpoints, but I can override their sensors from here. Elena looked up from her examination of the alien bodies with grim satisfaction. Their cardiovascular system depends on a dual heart arrangement, but both organs are located in the same body cavity. A single penetrating wound in the right location would be immediately fatal. Also, their lung capacity is about 30% larger than ours, which means they're more vulnerable to atmospheric pressure changes. Marcus absorbed this information while his hands continued working on the control terminal. Military experience had taught him that intelligence gathered during combat operations was often the difference between success and catastrophe. Every weakness they could identify might save human lives during the fighting that lay ahead. Atmospheric controls are accessible from this terminal, he reported. I can reduce oxygen content in specific sections, which should give us tactical advantages if we encounter resistance. The sound of approaching footsteps in the main corridor signaled the end of their preparation time. Security patrols were apparently more frequent than Marcus had initially observed, and their presence meant that the escape attempt would have to begin immediately rather than waiting for optimal conditions. Marcus looked at the faces of the people who had chosen to follow him into combat against impossible odds. They were scared, untrained, and equipped with improvised weapons against enemies possessing superior technology and numbers. But they were human beings who had decided to fight for their freedom rather than accept slavery, and that determination was worth more than any technological advantage. It's time, he announced simply. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. Every human they've captured, every species they've enslaved, every world they've destroyed, it all ends tonight. The first security checkpoint fell without the guards understanding what was happening to them. Marcus had used the maintenance terminal to reduce atmospheric pressure in their section by 15%, creating the equivalent of high-altitude conditions that left the aliens sluggish and confused. His team struck with the coordinated precision of a military unit, though none of them except Marcus had any formal combat training. Sarah Chun proved to be a natural tactician, directing David and two other engineers in the systematic dismantling of security equipment, while Marcus and Janet eliminated the guards. Elena Vasquez had positioned herself to observe alien physiology during combat, gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable for future encounters. Their reaction time decreases significantly under reduced oxygen conditions, Elena reported as they moved toward the second checkpoint. But their strength actually increases when they're under stress. We need to end confrontations quickly before they can adapt to atmospheric changes. Marcus acknowledged this information while studying the station schematics on a portable terminal they had acquired from the first checkpoint. The route to Docking Bay 7 required passing through 2 more security stations, each progressively more heavily defended. The aliens had clearly learned from their encounter with human resistance during the capture operation, because guard positions showed signs of recent reinforcement. They know we're coming, Janet observed, pointing to security camera feeds that showed increased patrol activity throughout their section. But they're still thinking like police officers dealing with escapees, not soldiers fighting an organized military operation. The second security checkpoint was defended by a different alien species than they had encountered previously. These creatures were larger and more heavily armored, carrying weapons that glowed with barely contained energy. Their formation suggested military training, and their movements showed none of the casual arrogance that had characterized earlier encounters. Marcus studied their positions with the analytical mind that had made him legendary among Special Forces units worldwide. 6 guards, 2 supporting heavy weapons positions, defensive positions that provided excellent fields of fire down the main corridor. The tactical situation was challenging, but not impossible for someone with his experience. Atmospheric reduction won't be as effective against this species, Elena warned after observing the aliens through security monitors. Their respiratory systems appear more efficient than the previous guards. We need a different approach. Marcus was already formulating an alternate plan based on the station schematics and his assessment of alien security protocols. The checkpoint controlled access to a major junction that connected residential areas with industrial sections, making it a critical strategic position that would be heavily defended under any circumstances. David, I need you to access the environmental controls for this section, Marcus ordered. Can you create a cascading power failure that would disable their defensive systems? The engineers studied the terminal interfaces with growing excitement. Better than that, I can overload their energy weapons by flooding this section with electromagnetic interference. Their technology appears to be more vulnerable to power surges than our equipment would be. Sarah had discovered an alternative route through maintenance passages that would bring them to within 50 meters of the checkpoint from an unexpected direction. The aliens designed these passages for their own technicians, so there shouldn't be any security sensors. We could approach from behind their positions while they're dealing with power system failures. The plan that emerged combined Marcus's military expertise with the technical knowledge of civilians who had learned to think creatively under pressure. Phase 1 involved David creating electromagnetic interference that would disable alien weapons and sensors. Phase 2 required Sarah leading a flanking movement through maintenance passages while Marcus and Janet approached from the main corridor. Phase 3 was direct assault on confused and partially disabled defenders. The electromagnetic pulse that David generated exceeded all expectations. The aliens' energy weapons not only stopped functioning, but began emitting dangerous levels of heat and radiation that forced their operators to abandon them immediately. Emergency lighting throughout the section failed, creating darkness that favored human night vision over alien sensory capabilities. Marcus moved through the checkpoint like a force of nature, his improvised weapons finding targets with deadly precision, while his team eliminated guards who were still struggling to understand why their equipment had malfunctioned. The engagement lasted less than 2 minutes, leaving 6 alien bodies scattered around security stations that had been reduced to smoking wreckage. Their weapons technology is more advanced than ours, but it's also more complex, David observed while examining the disabled energy weapons. Greater sophistication means more potential failure points that could be exploited under the right conditions. The route to Docking Bay 7 led through industrial sections where the station's true purpose became horrifyingly clear. Massive processing facilities stretched beyond visual range, their assembly lines converting raw materials extracted from slave worlds into finished products for galactic markets. The scale of the operation suggested that entire star systems had been strip-mined to feed the HFY economic machine. More disturbing were the biological modification centers where captured beings were surgically altered to improve their utility as slave labor. Marcus observed creatures that had once been sentient beings, but now functioned as biological machines, their independence and intelligence systematically removed through procedures that defied human ethical understanding. "This is what they planned for us," Sarah said, her voice carrying a mixture of rage and determination that Marcus recognized from soldiers who had witnessed war crimes. "This is what they've been doing to other species for 300 years. Marcus felt the same cold fury that had driven him through the most difficult operations of his military career. The HFY syndicate represented everything he had spent 23 years fighting against: the systematic oppression of the weak by those who possess superior power. Their operation was evil in its purest form, and destroying it was a moral imperative that transcended personal survival. The final security checkpoint guarding Docking Bay 7 was defended by HFY soldiers rather than the auxiliary species they had encountered earlier. These were the aliens who had captured Marcus in Montana, and their formation showed that they had learned from their previous encounters with human resistance. Heavy weapons positions covered all approaches, while mobile patrols eliminated any possibility of flanking movements. 12 soldiers for heavy weapons, defensive positions that eliminate concealment options, Janet reported after studying the checkpoint through security monitors. They're professional military, and they're taking us seriously now. Marcus examined the tactical situation with growing respect for his opponents. The HFY had adapted quickly to human resistance capabilities, implementing countermeasures that neutralized most of the advantages his team had exploited in previous encounters. The aliens were learning, which meant that future operations would be progressively more difficult. "Elena, what did you learn about HFY physiology during our earlier encounters?" Marcus asked while studying possible approaches to the heavily defended position. The xenobiologist consulted notes she had made on a portable device acquired from the maintenance team. Their 4-eye arrangement provides excellent peripheral vision, but they have a significant blind spot directly above their heads. Their exoskeleton provides protection against kinetic impacts, but the joints between segments are vulnerable to penetrating attacks. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had guided him through impossible situations during his military career. The tactical problem was complex, but every enemy had weaknesses that could be exploited by someone with the right knowledge and sufficient determination. The Kethvar were formidable opponents, but they were not invincible. David, can you access the docking bay's atmosphere controls from here? Marcus inquired while formulating a plan that would require precise timing and coordination. The engineer worked at his terminal with increasing excitement. I can do better than atmospheric controls. The docking bay has emergency decompression protocols that can be activated manually. If I can create a controlled breach in the outer hull, the resulting pressure differential would be enough to disable anyone not wearing protective equipment. Sarah had located another route through maintenance passages that would bring them to within 30 meters of the alien's position. There's a ventilation shaft that opens directly above their command post. If someone could approach from that direction while the decompression was happening, they might be able to eliminate the entire defensive position. The plan that Marcus developed was the most dangerous operation he had ever contemplated. Success required him to navigate through a maintenance shaft, while David created a controlled decompression that would disable the Kethvar defenders. The timing had to be perfect, because any mistake would result in either his death or the failure of the entire escape attempt. If this doesn't work, take the team back to the human dormitory and wait for another opportunity. Marcus instructed Janet while stripping down to essential equipment for movement through the narrow shaft. Don't attempt to rescue me, and don't let anyone else try to be a hero. The mission is getting our people out of here alive. The ventilation shaft was barely large enough to accommodate human physiology, and the metal construction groaned ominously under Marcus's weight as he crawled toward the docking bay. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows that made distance judgment difficult, while the sound of his movement seemed impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Below him, the Kethvar defenders maintained their positions with professional discipline that reminded Marcus of elite units he had faced during counterterrorism operations. Their weapons remained trained on the main approaches while their commanders coordinated patrol schedules through communication devices that chittered with alien language. David's signal came as a brief pulse of light transmitted through the station's communication systems. Marcus had 10 seconds to reach the optimal position before the decompression began, and failure to coordinate properly would result in his own death along with the aliens below. The maintenance shaft's exit panel was directly above the Kethvar command position, but it was secured with alien technology that required precious seconds to override. Marcus worked with the focused intensity that had made him legendary among military engineers, his fingers moving across unfamiliar controls while the countdown continued in his mind. The decompression began with a sound like the universe tearing itself apart. Emergency alarms throughout the docking bay shrieked warnings in multiple alien languages, while atmosphere pressure dropped to levels that made breathing impossible without protective equipment. The Kethvar soldiers staggered under the sudden pressure differential, their movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated as their bodies struggled to adapt. Marcus dropped through the exit panel into the chaos below, his improvised weapons striking with surgical precision while the aliens fought to maintain consciousness under rapidly changing atmosphere conditions. The engagement lasted 47 seconds, leaving 12 Kethvar soldiers dead around defensive positions that would never again threaten human prisoners. Docking Bay 7 stretched before them like a cathedral dedicated to interstellar travel. Ships from dozens of different civilizations filled the vast space, their hulls displaying technological sophistication that made human spacecraft look like primitive toys. The vessel that Marcus had identified for their escape was a Kethvar transport designed for moving large numbers of prisoners between facilities. "Can you operate this thing?" Sarah asked while studying the ship's organic control interfaces with obvious nervousness. Marcus was already examining the pilot station with growing confidence. It's more complex than anything I've ever flown, but the basic principles appear similar to aircraft I operated during military service. Besides, it doesn't have to work perfectly. It just has to get us away from here. As his team secured the transport and prepared for departure, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction at what they had accomplished. 43 human beings had fought their way through a heavily defended alien facility, demonstrating that Earth's children were capable of organized resistance against seemingly impossible odds. More importantly, they had proven that the HFY Syndicate was not invincible. But their escape was only the beginning of a much larger war. Somewhere in the galaxy, millions of beings remained enslaved by aliens who had never faced organized military resistance. The transport ship they had captured contained navigation data that would reveal the locations of other facilities, along with intelligence that could be used to plan systematic attacks against Syndicate operations. Marcus Kane had been captured as a single prisoner. He was leaving as the leader of a resistance movement that would teach the galaxy why humans had earned their reputation as Earth's most dangerous predators. The stolen HFY transport Sikatar limped through hyperspace with its human crew learning alien technology through trial and error that could have killed them all. Marcus had managed to activate the ship's autopilot using navigation data extracted from the facility's computers, but their destination remained uncertain until Elena deciphered enough of the alien language to understand their flight path. "We're heading toward a system designated as Kepler 442, Elena reported from the communication station she had claimed as her own. According to the navigation computer, it's a staging area for Syndicate operations in this galactic sector. There are 17 different facilities orbiting the primary star, including what appears to be a major command center. Marcus absorbed this information while studying tactical displays that revealed the true scope of HFY operations. The Syndicate controlled territory spanning 43 star systems, with slave labor camps, industrial facilities, and military bases positioned throughout a region that encompassed millions of sentient beings. The scale of their empire was staggering, but it also represented a weakness that could be exploited by someone with the right strategy. "David, what's our ship's condition?" Marcus asked while reviewing intelligence data they had acquired during their escape. The engineer had spent the past 6 hours learning alien technology with the focused intensity of someone whose survival depended on understanding systems designed by non-human intelligence. "The hyperdrive is functional, but operating at reduced efficiency. Weapon systems are offline, but I think I can restore partial capability if we can find replacement components. Life support is stable, but it's designed for HFY physiology rather than humans." Sarah had been working with the ship's computer systems to extract intelligence about Syndicate operations throughout their territory. The navigation database contains coordinates for every facility in their network, along with security protocols and operational schedules. If we can get this information to the right people, it could be used to plan coordinated strikes against their entire infrastructure. Marcus felt the familiar anticipation that had preceded his most successful military operations. They possessed intelligence that could destroy an empire built on systematic oppression, but turning that knowledge into effective action would require capabilities that exceeded anything their small group could accomplish independently. The solution came from an unexpected source. The ship's communication array detected a transmission in what Elena identified as human language, specifically military radio protocols that had been modified for interstellar use. Someone else from Earth was operating in this region of space, and their signals suggested organized resistance rather than scattered survivors. "This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United Nations Space Defense Force, calling any human vessels in this system. Please respond on emergency frequency Delta 7 Alpha." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his capture. Hope based on concrete possibilities rather than desperate determination. Earth had apparently developed interstellar capabilities faster than the HFY had anticipated, and military forces were already operating against Syndicate positions. "Colonel Mitchell, this is Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane, U.S. Army Special Forces, Marcus responded through the communication array. I have 43 rescued prisoners aboard a captured HFY transport, along with intelligence data that could be valuable for planning operations against Syndicate facilities. The response came immediately, suggesting that Colonel Mitchell had been monitoring communication frequencies, hoping to locate human survivors. Sergeant Kane, we have you on sensors. Dock with the UNS Defiance for debriefing and medical evaluation. Be advised that we're operating under combat conditions, and this system is contested territory. The UNS Defiance was unlike anything Marcus had expected from Earth's space program. The ship was massive, clearly designed for military operations rather than exploration, and its hull bristled with weapons that suggested humanity had learned to fight back against alien aggression. Docking procedures were handled by automated systems that guided their stolen transport into a hangar bay filled with vessels displaying similar evidence of recent combat. Colonel Mitchell proved to be exactly what Marcus had hoped, a professional military officer who understood both the strategic implications of the intelligence they had gathered and the tactical challenges involved in fighting a technologically superior enemy. Her briefing room was filled with star charts and operational planning materials that revealed the scope of humanity's response to alien aggression. The HFY made their first mistake when they started raiding Earth's outer settlements. Mitchell explained while reviewing the intelligence data that Marcus's team had acquired. Their second mistake was assuming we couldn't develop countermeasures against their technology. Their third mistake was not understanding that humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. The strategic situation that Mitchell outlined was both encouraging and sobering. Earth's governments had responded to alien raids with unprecedented cooperation, pooling resources to develop interstellar military capabilities within 18 months of first contact. The United Nations Space Defense Force represented the combined technological and industrial capacity of every major nation, supported by military personnel drawn from elite units worldwide. But humanity's forces were still vastly outnumbered by syndicate fleets that had been operating for centuries. Every victory required careful planning and significant casualties, while defeats could result in the complete destruction of irreplaceable ships and crews. The war was being fought with human courage and ingenuity against alien numbers and technological superiority. Your intelligence changes everything, Mitchell continued while studying the facility locations and security protocols that Sarah had extracted from syndicate computers. We've been fighting blind, attacking targets of opportunity without understanding their strategic importance. This data gives us the ability to plan systematic strikes that could cripple their entire operation. Marcus studied the tactical displays that showed current UNAS positions throughout the contested region. Human forces were organized into small task forces that struck quickly against isolated targets before withdrawing to avoid counterattack. The strategy was sound, but limited because it allowed the syndicate to maintain control over most of their territory while losing only peripheral facilities. What if we could change the operational parameters? Marcus suggested, his mind working through possibilities that his military experience had taught him to recognize. Instead of attacking their facilities, what if we turned their own slaves against them? Mitchell's expression showed immediate interest in this concept. Explain your thinking. Marcus gestured toward intelligence displays that showed the locations of major slave labor facilities throughout syndicate territory. The HFY control millions of beings from dozens of different species. Most of those prisoners were captured recently enough to remember their freedom and retain the will to fight. What they lack is leadership, organization, and the knowledge that resistance is possible. Elena had been studying alien physiology reports while listening to their conversation. Every species has different capabilities that could be valuable in combat. Some are stronger than humans, others are faster, and several appear to be naturally resistant to HFY technology. If they could be organized into coordinated resistance movements, they would represent a force that the Syndicate has never had to face. The plan that emerged from their discussion was audacious even by the standards of military operations that Marcus had planned during his Special Forces career. Rather than continuing to attack Syndicate facilities from the outside, human forces would infiltrate slave labor camps throughout their territory and organize simultaneous uprisings that would destroy the Empire from within. The risks are enormous, Mitchell acknowledged after reviewing Marcus's operational proposal. If even one infiltration mission is detected, the Syndicate would execute every prisoner in their facilities and implement security measures that would make future operations impossible. Marcus felt the same certainty that had guided him through impossible missions during his military career. The risks of continuing current operations are even greater. The Syndicate is learning from our attacks and adapting their defenses. Eventually, they'll develop countermeasures that neutralize our technological advantages completely. David had been studying Syndicate ship designs while their discussion continued. Their vessels are heavily automated, which means they require smaller crews than equivalent human ships. If we could capture enough of their transports, we could move resistance forces between systems without being detected by their sensors. Sarah had identified patterns in Syndicate operations that revealed critical vulnerabilities in their organizational structure. They move prisoners between facilities on predictable schedules, using routes that avoid their military positions. Those transports would be perfect targets for capture operations that also rescue additional personnel for resistance activities. The operation that Marcus proposed would require coordinating attacks across 17 different star systems simultaneously, using captured alien vessels to transport human special forces personnel and newly recruited resistance fighters. Success would depend on precise timing, flawless communication, and the ability of dozens of different species to work together against their common oppressor. Colonel Mitchell made her decision with the same decisive leadership that Marcus had admired in the best officers during his military career. Operation Reaper is authorized. I'm assigning you operational command of all infiltration activities, with full authority to recruit personnel and requisition equipment necessary for mission success. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility that came with command decisions that would affect millions of lives. But he also felt the satisfaction of finally having the resources necessary to turn his military expertise against enemies who had never faced organized human resistance. The next 6 months transformed Marcus Kane from a captured prisoner into the leader of the largest resistance movement in galactic history. Human Special Forces personnel infiltrated Syndicate facilities throughout their territory, training slaves from dozens of different species in guerrilla warfare tactics and coordinating plans for simultaneous uprisings. The aliens who had built their empire on systematic oppression discovered that their victims possessed capabilities they had never imagined. Species that had seemed suitable only for manual labor proved to be natural warriors when properly organized and equipped. Beings that had appeared broken by captivity retained the intelligence and determination necessary for complex military operations. When Operation Reaper began, 43 star systems erupted in coordinated rebellion that destroyed 3 centuries of Kethvar expansion in less than 72 hours. Slave labor camps became military bases for resistance forces that captured alien ships and weapons for use against their former oppressors. Industrial facilities that had processed the wealth of stolen worlds became manufacturing centers for equipment designed to support newly liberated populations. The Kethvar Syndicate collapsed, not because human technology was superior to their own, but because they had never understood that sentient beings would eventually resist oppression regardless of the odds against success. Their empire had been built on the assumption that fear was stronger than hope, and Marcus Kane had proven that assumption was fundamentally wrong. In the aftermath of Operation Reaper, as newly liberated species worked together to rebuild their shattered civilizations, Marcus returned to his cabin in the Montana wilderness. The mountains were the same as when he had left them, but the man who walked their paths was no longer haunted by memories of wars he couldn't finish. The galaxy knew why humans had earned the right to walk among the stars as equals rather than slaves. And somewhere in the vast darkness between worlds, other empires built on oppression were learning to fear a species that had given one of their own a call sign that spoke of death itself. The Reaper had taught them all why some wars were worth fighting, regardless of the cost.